Moving on, sport may be filled with dirty tricks, whether it be outrageous tackles, tripping up opponents or distracting players with personal insults, but never has a team deployed a walking biological weapon until now. Australia's cricket squad has found itself on a sticky wicket after being accused of hypocrisy and shamelessness for fielding a COVID-infected team member in the Commonwealth Games. Star player Tahlia McGrath both batted and bowled in the game against India and even took a crucial catch that helped her country bag gold. While she was forced to socially distance and wear a mask, all protocol was thrown out the window when she couldn't resist running in to hug her teammates at the match's conclusion, prompting outrage from viewers. So, with Aussies having been subject to some of the harshest lockdown restrictions worldwide, and McGrath and her team truly stumped, Nicola.
Oh.
I was very confused by this story because earlier in the Commonwealth Games, an Indian discus thrower was banned from competing in the Commonwealth Games because he had tested positive in a random spot check for COVID and was told he was immediately disqualified. So how then can a player within a team game, it didn't have to be the whole team that got disqualified, just the one player, how on earth were they allowed to continue? It seems like there's one rule for some, another rule for other people, and especially considering how strict Australia were during COVID, I can't help but feel that this feels like an unfair advantage towards them.
Absolutely, because, I mean, if you have one single person not in a team game just by themselves, I don't understand why they could not compete, whereas someone in a team could. I would have thought someone in a team would have been at greater risk to pass it on, rather than someone who is just by themselves doing a kind of lone sport, so to speak. And yet, in the UK, if you have COVID, you don't necessarily have to isolate. You can go to work. So why was that person not allowed to compete? And this person was. And I mean, you know, an Indian competitor, an Australian competitor, it seems a bit dodgy.
What do you think the difference is between the Aussie cricket player and the Indian
well, that's an anomaly that I can't square that circle. I agree with Nicola. I find that completely confusing. I think they should all be allowed to play because COVID isn't what it was. It's a mild virus now. Its chances of killing you are extremely slim now, and we've got to adapt. We've got to stop treating it like the bubonic plague. So I'm all for Australia selecting this cricketer. I think the Indian guy should have been able to compete as well, and good for Australia. They're finally learning the errors of their ways when it came to Djokovic and that absurd ban on him playing in the Australian Open tennis. And the ludicrously long lockdowns that they had that for which there was no justification. Ludicrous.
Anne-Marie. I couldn't agree more, though, because I think this is really important. We've got to learn to live with this thing. It's got to be one rule and it's got to be applied across the board. So if the rule has not been applied across the board, that, I absolutely agree with you, Nicola, is bang out of order and it's not acceptable. But also, it doesn't really matter whether Australians or anybody else thinks that, you know, this is a sort of disgrace, you know, they've had their harsh lockdowns and all that sort of business, because in this country, we've changed our rules. We've gone for the go to live with it strategy. If somebody, quite frankly, if they're well enough to be able to catch and do this, then maybe we should learn the lesson that perhaps we don't need to worry so much about COVID, particularly for younger people. And I do understand that for some, it's still a risk, and therefore they need to decide how they're going to live with that and to keep themselves away should they be concerned about it. But I think this is about individual responsibility. And if you're feeling fine, in the same way that if you have anything else, on you go.
Well, there's the differences. In the UK, self-isolation is not mandatory if you have COVID. The government says you should try and stay at home and avoid contact with people for up to 5 days. But you haven't got to stay at home, obviously. In Australia, if you test positive for COVID, you must immediately isolate for 7 days. Stay at home, even try and isolate from people that you live with. And if you have no symptoms after 7 days, you can stop isolating and you don't need a negative test result. But, so Australia have not broken any rules.
Well, here?
Here.
That's in Australia.
You're allowed
to
so here, they haven't broken any rules.
Here.
I think the only people who should be to blame or should be investigated, perhaps, are the Commonwealth Games. Because,
Totally.
Absolutely. I'm going to say it. No one else said it yet, but I'm presuming it's a race issue. That's what I'm going to presume. They're treating the Indians differently to the Australians.
Of course.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what it reads to me as, completely. And as an Australian viewer as well, imagine watching that, being so happy that your team had got gold, but actually having the fury of the fact that they shouldn't have been doing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.